Hello and welcome to our Jitterbit Tech Talk here, October 2020. We've got some exciting things that we're going to be diving into today. But before we do, let me introduce myself. My name is Corey Willis. I'm sure if you've been on the Tech Talks before, you've seen me out here, but I'm the Director of Product Education, Jitterbit University. All of that is kind of under my watch there. So hopefully you guys are getting some good material out of that, some good knowledge out of that. But today we're doing a Tech Talk, so a live broadcast here. And here's the thing about the Tech Talks. I'll go ahead and kind of set some ground rules. I'm going to show you some things, kind of demo out a little interesting strategy that some of you may find it relevant. Hopefully you do. Honestly, even if you don't use this particular technique, there's going to be some things that we cover in this and some scripting that we use that hopefully you'll find valuable to you. So thank you for coming out and joining with us. But as we do go through the Tech Talk, we do watch the chat. And so if you've got some questions, particularly if they're related to what we're covering, but even if they're not, we always make a commitment to you on these broadcasts that if you have a question, we will do our best to answer it live. If for whatever reason we can't answer it live, because obviously I'm kind of limited in what I do product education here. So if it's something unrelated, we may redirect you to some other resources or get you an answer after the broadcast is complete by connecting you with the appropriate resource here at Jitterbit. So with that, one little announcement that I do want to talk about, because we always do this on the Tech Talks, is talk a little bit about Jitterbit University and some of the exciting things that we've got coming down the pipe. So we've got about 3, maybe 4 new courses that are going to be coming out over the next 2 to 3 months. And one thing is, if you've been through the Jitterbit Foundations and Core, let's be honest, the courses are getting a little dated. They're going through a complete refresh, and we're going to have a whole new training path available for that, including an introduction to Design Studio. We have the introduction to Cloud Studio already. We're going to have the introduction to scripting in Design Studio. We already have that in the Cloud Studio path as well. And what we're working on for both of those paths right now is the advanced transformation mapping, talking about the instance functions and how they're used in each of the platforms. So just a lot of exciting things that are coming out and coming down the pipe. You're also going to probably be seeing here real soon some tutorials on how to implement some of our process templates. We've talked about these on a previous Tech Talk and the process templates, what they are and kind of how they work. Micah Johnson, I believe, was on with us and kind of went through some of that. But we have been working very diligently to get some actual implementation tutorials out on some of our most popular process templates. And so those will be coming out here real soon as well. So just keep an eye open for all of that that's going to be coming down the pipe. But with that, guys, we're going to dive on in and really talk about what our project is for today. Okay, so today we're talking about external credential storage and management. So you may be thinking, well, what does this even mean? I mean, don't we put the credentials to things in the Jitterbit project? And that is the standard way to do things. Okay, when you create your endpoint, your source, your target, your connector definition, things like that, you're going to put your credentials in there. You know, what's the host, what's the server, what's the database name if it's a database, et cetera, et cetera. But we do have some customers that say, you know, in our methodologies, when we move from, say, the development environment to the production environment, we have a rule of thumb that we don't do any code changes. And if we're changing the Jitterbit project to change credentials to our production systems, our people look at that as a code change. So is there any other way we can go about this? Well, one way we've talked about it here on the Tech Talks before, is to move credentials from the endpoint definitions to project variables. Once you're in the project variables, you can deploy your project out going to the management studio, or not the management studio, the management console, and change things there. And so that's one way to do it. But today I want to show you something that's a little bit different, okay? Company that I worked for before I came here at Jitterbit about, 7 years ago or so, we used this approach. Essentially, it is having some other system that you store your credentials in, okay? And what I'm going to be showing you today, I'm doing this very simple because it's really just an introduction to the concept. And there are some other things that you can do and some other methods you could use for this to kind of modify this technique to fit your needs, okay? And so it's like, for instance, one thing, I'll just go ahead and get it out of the way. We're using a database and we're storing the passwords in the database that only we have access to, but we're storing those in clear text. Now, for many of you, you're already starting to go, oh my gosh, we can't do that. That's fine. There are other methods. You can encrypt your database columns and different things like that. You could do encryption native within the Jitterbit platform and use AES. And there's a lot of different methods you could do. But again, what I'm trying to show you today is just an introduction to this concept of how can we put our credentials not in the Jitterbit platform. And so if you find yourself in one of those situations where your organization says, you know what, this just isn't really the way we want to do this, there are some alternatives, okay? I am going to be showing you with Design Studio today and not Cloud Studio. Cloud Studio does have a few little different approaches to things in this manner. And honestly, most of our customers who do this with the external credential management are still doing it in Design Studio. So I thought, hey, let's show you there. We haven't shown Design Studio for a while on the broadcasts anyway. So it's a good chance to get back in here. And for those of you that are using Design Studio, get you back into the platform that you're used to seeing on a daily basis anyway. Okay, so we're using a database. Now, the database that we've chosen to use for this example for the credential management is a Microsoft SQL database. It really doesn't matter, okay? You could use a web API. It doesn't matter what we're using. We're using some external system to put this data in. We've already got it configured. We have 2 environments set up. And essentially, our table structure is pretty much a key value pair, okay? The key being the variable name that we're going to use. And we're going to dive into the studio here in a minute and show you, but I just want to level set a little. So the key is basically the variable name we're going to be using. The value is, of course, the value for that. We added one other column to this, and that's environment. And this creates something really interesting. I'll show you as we get into this. Okay, but let's go ahead and jump over to the studio and get you an introduction into this. The example that we're going to be showing is really pretty simple. All we're doing with this is we're going to extract some data out of a database and put it into a CSV file on an SFTP server. Okay, that's the operation we're going to build, but the credentials for those systems aren't going to be in Jitterbit. Now, we do have to have at least some level of credential. Okay, so here's what I've done so far. To prep out this project, I created a source, a database source. This is the Microsoft SQL. This is what I'm calling the system settings database, okay, the credential management. But notice when I configured this, everything is variabilized, even the password down here, okay? So all of these are project variables. Now, I'm using one database for all of my credential management, and I'm identifying the environment within that table structure. I've seen it done before. I've done it before where these are separated and you have different tables and maybe even completely separate databases, and that's fine. You can modify this technique to do with it, as you need to. But this right here is the key. I'm going to have some way to get to my credentials. If you're using private agents, there's some ways you can actually store this in the private agent configuration file and not have it in your project. There's a lot of really interesting little quirks that you can do with this. But there's that. If I scroll down over here, you're going to see there's my project variables. And this is all I have in this project. The rest of it we're going to build together today, okay? So really exciting stuff. But system settings, password, username, database, server, there it all is. And that allows me to connect to my system settings database and pull back the data that I need. So we're going to build a lot of this dynamic. And the really cool thing is that by the way we're going to build it, when we do a project migration, right now I'm in my Tech Talk dev environment. When I migrate this later on to my Tech Talk environment, I'm going to have to make 0 changes to my project. I'll be connecting to a completely different system. Now, the key to this is defining a process that's going to pull back these credentials and variabilize them. Okay, I'm going to choose to do this in a script. You could do this in a standard transformation and iterate through them in that manner. In my case, I like it in a script. It's concise. There's a lot of flexibility in it, but it does require a little bit of extra little coding per se. And so let's dive in and see how it's done. So here in scripts, I'm going to say new script, and that's going to open up. Let's see, get the little wheelie thing to finish spinning here. Come on. It's been working great all morning. There it is. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and name this, and I'm just going to call this Credential. Oh, we got caps lock on. There we go. Credential initialization. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully that's right. But it doesn't really matter. It is what I set it to. So now we're going to start writing it out. So the first thing I'm going to do a SQL statement, just a real simple little SQL statement to go and fetch from the database those credentials. Now, I'm going to ultimately use a DB execute function to do this. But before I do that, I like separating out the actual SQL statement into a local variable and then pulling that into the DB execute on the next line. It's just something I like to do. It keeps it clean and separate. So I'll do a SQL local variable here, and that'll begin writing out my select statement. So I'm doing it as a select star. We could minimize that down because we actually don't need the environment in this, but it's okay. It's going to work just fine. From credential storage, there we go. So that's my my table name there, where environment equals. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the native Jitterbit functions to dynamically pull in the environment name that I'm in. This right here, this is what sets it up to where when I migrate the project, I don't have to make any changes whatsoever. It's just done, okay? So now this is going to have to be potentially quoted to handle different types of environments names. So I'm going to use my quote function, which is going to surround this in single quotes, okay? And then I'm going to use get environment name. Now you see we could do ID there as well. You see that in the pop-up, but I'm going to use name and just close out that function. Okay, so now I've got my SQL statement. Now I need to go down and do my DB execute. I want that the array that it returns, because it is going to be a multi-dimensional array that the DB execute function returns, that I want it stored in a variable as well. I'm going to again use a local variable. I have no reason for this to go on to a further process, so there's no reason for me to here use a global. So there we go, DB execute, and there you see it pops up for me to select the system settings database. I'll choose that. And here for my SQL string, I just bring in that SQL local variable that we did on the first line. Okay. So that's what we've got so far. Now we've got now we will have, once we run this, a multi-dimensional array stored in this credential array local variable. And we need to go through and figure out how long this is, because we're going to have to iterate through it to go through and store all of these into the variables. So first, let's do a record count and not the function there, okay? But there we go. Record count is going to be my local variable I'm going to use. And no, not that. I need to do a length. Now, if you remember from some of the Jitterbit University courses, length, if it gives a string, if you feed a string into the length function, it's going to tell you how many characters. If you give it an array, it's going to tell you how many elements are in the array. Okay, so that's what we want here. And we want to use that credential array local variable. So now we know how many variables we have to work with. You know, do we have 3 in there, or do we have 300? Whatever that might be. And, you know, in your scenario, you may decide that you want to add something else to your database and filter this and have a different initialization script for, you know, each set of processes, and not do a select star and keep this a little more concise. Obviously, you can make those tweaks and adjustments to this methodology in any way that you need to. Now we need to go through and basically start our while statement. But before we do that, we've got to set a baseline. So I'm going to sit here and call another variable here, iterator, and just set that equal to 0. Just kind of initialize this little counter that I'm going to be looping through and comparing to my current record count. Okay. So now we go in line 6 into our while statement. And so I'll say while my condition for this is while iterator is less than record count. Okay. So now the while statement, I've have the first argument in there, put the comma. I'm going to skip down to the next line just to keep this concise. And I like indenting a little bit, keep the code a little cleaner, and just bring that over to where that first parenthesis starts. Got a lot of different approaches that you guys can take with that. A lot of it is just personal style, and that's fine. But what we're going to use for this is we're going to use the set function. Obviously, I'm sure you guys are aware and used to the $ notation for global variables. $ variable name equals and the value. Well, in this case, we don't know what the variable name is at this point. So we're going to use set. So that way we can bring in not only the variable value, but the variable name. Okay. So we're going to start by pulling in the first element. It's 0 base. So it's actually element 0 of the array. So here we go. We're going to say credential array. Now, again, if you remember back to some of the courses, to access individual elements, we can use the square bracket notation and tell it which element number we want to work with. Okay, so we can do square bracket. Now, in this case, because it's a multi-dimensional array, we first basically have to think of it in like a spreadsheet, okay, a database query, whatever, CSV file. You've got to select first your row, and once you have your row, then you select your column. Okay, so it's a two-part process here. To select the row, we're going to use iterator, okay, because we're starting with iterator equals 0. We see that on line 5. So iterator equals 0. So we're just going to say iterator. Now from there, we need the first column, which is column 0, because again, we're 0 based here. And that's going to be fixed through our process. So we'll just say square bracket 0. Okay. So that's going to get us that first value. And remember, it's key value pairs the way we structure this. So first of it is the variable name. You want to call it variable name. It doesn't matter. We're not using the column names in this part of the process anyway. So it could be variable name, variable value. We've got the variable name. And then the next thing would be the variable value. And so we're going to mimic this same process here and still use iterator. But this time we're going to use array element 1. Okay. So hopefully you're following here. We're going to close that out. And then we're going to jump down because we need two things to happen within this while statement. So we're not closing out the while statement yet. We got one other thing that we need to do, and we need to increase the counter on the iterator. Now we could simply say iterator equals iterator plus 1. There is a simpler way to do it. We can just say iterator plus plus. And that's going to iterate that up 1, and then we'll come down and close out our while statement, and we are done. That's it. So we've got what? Actually 8 lines of script here, and we could consolidate that down even further because we broke it out for formatting. So, I mean, really, we're talking 5 lines, 5 statements here. 4 if you consider that we could consolidate SQL in. So really 4 lines of practical script that sets all of this up for us. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's some questions coming in. I'm going to hop over to those here in just a minute, but you're seeing my screen right now, so I can't see your questions just yet. So we'll have to come back to some of that, but we will, I promise you. But there we go. I'm going to save that and exit out. And now I've got my initialization script, and I can go on to build the rest of my process. And like I said, we're going to do a simple little process because in that system settings database, I have credentials and all the information for connecting to a Postgres database and also connecting up to an SFTP server to drop some files in that we generate. So we're just going to come in and say, let's do a new operation. It's going to be a simple transformation. And we're just going to call this customer extraction. Okay. So we need a source, so let's go ahead and go in there. This is going to be our Postgres database. And so we'll call it customer database. That may make a little more sense here. Keep us a little bit more descriptive, and obviously you should hopefully have your organization's best practices documentation as far as what's your naming protocols and things like that. But I'm just keeping it real simple for you today. Type is database. Now, the driver I do have to select. Hopefully, when you're moving from dev to production, you're not changing from Postgres to SQL or Postgres to MySQL, things like that, keeping that consistent. So we'll just come in here and choose Postgres because that's what we're using across the board. Now, server name, and I didn't jot these down, so I'm going to have to try my best to recall what we put in here. I believe that it is db.server is what we have in the database. The database name is db.database. The login is db.username. And then the password is db.password. And hopefully I typed that correctly. Now, here's one of the things is by doing this, you do limit some functionality within the tool. For instance, I can't do a test connection here. Okay. There's going to be another limiting factor I'm going to show you in a moment, and I'm actually going to have to come back and do an edit here temporarily during the dev cycle, but we'll get back to it, okay? I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's exit out of that. Let's go ahead and do the target next. So the target, like I told you, that's going to be an SFTP. I'll just keep it simple, call it SFTP. And there we go, FTP site, host name, SFTP.server, I do believe. Path, we'll leave just root path there, that's fine. Login, sftp.username. Nope, there we go. Password, sftp.password. So I'm using the square bracket notation, and that is what is bringing in these variables that are being set. I do need to set the file name, and of course I could do some really interesting things here. I could just do like output, and then let's see if it's gonna. I don't see it popping up. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Unique. I was thinking it was called GUID. It's been a while since I've used it. So that's just gonna make a unique file name. No big deal there. We're gonna do it as CSV. I don't like FTP rename. It works great for certain things. But it can cause some issues with some other things. So you just got to be a little cautious there. But then I do need to make sure to come down to my security options and change it from the unsecure FTP, which who wants to use that anymore, over to at least SFTP. And we've got something that's a little bit more secure in its transmission. Okay, so there's that. We've got our source, we've got our target. All of this is going to be read in by that initialization script that we've got, and essentially we're going to put that at the beginning of every operation that we end up building in this technique. But now we need to build a transformation. But when we go to build this, it's going to want to dynamically connect back to the database to pull in that database schema. But we don't have those variables loaded yet. Now I'm in the dev environment, okay? So I'm not using production credentials, but temporarily I am going to have to go back to the customer database and insert some default values. Okay. Now, a default value can be used in this. I'm not normally a fan of leaving the default values in because if something happens and just bad things can happen. There's times that it makes perfect sense. Okay. But it's perfect for testing connections and doing your initial development. We are going to come back and remove them. How you do it, if you're not aware, is you come in right before the closing square bracket and you put in curly braces. And inside those curly braces, you can put your default values. In my case, my server name is going to be learningsandbox.jitterbit.com. My database is going to be my name, Corey.Willis. My username is the same. And then password. Of course, it start out, you can't see it, so you got to go by faith a little bit here. But I'm going to put in my curly braces and then put in my password. Now that I put in the default values, I should be able to test the connection. And it uses those default values because the variables are not populated. And in production, if you left this, the variables would be used as long as they're there. Like I said, I don't like leaving them the majority of the time because there's just always that, well, what if for whatever reason that variable doesn't get populated? I don't want to go into a different system, things like that. So, but for now, it's perfect. It's exactly what we want. We're going to edit it back out later. but it's going to give us the connection to be able to build the transformation. Now, if you're not working with a database and you're working with, say, a JSON Web API or an XML structure or something like that you can build a transformation without having to dynamically connect, then you don't need to go through that step. Okay, I'm just choosing to use a database, so it's got to be there. But let's go ahead and build the transformation. And let's not leave it named new transformation. That's not good. So we'll just call it customer extraction. I'm personally a big fan of naming the transformations the same or at least similar to your operations, because typically they're going to be used one-to-one. You make the decision as you see fit there. It is going to be a text target here. We don't need to write a manual SQL statement. We're just going to pull it all in. And this right here, this is the piece why I had to put in the default values. Okay. Now, I'm keeping this super simple. I'm going to choose my customer table. Obviously, we could do some more interesting things here, but that's not what this Tech Talk is about. So we're going to get over here, do our little CSV file. And again, I'm going to call that customer extraction, same type of thing. And just throw in some fields here. Customer. If you've been through some of the training stuff, you're familiar with this. We kind of use the same simple stuff over and over because it just works. It shows the principles, and that's what this is really about. Okay, so we've got a basic structure. Of course, we can take a look. Customer address, city, state, zip. I missed country, but that's fine. We'll leave it out. Again, it's not what this particular Tech Talk is about. So we get on over here. We'll use our auto map. And only thing is we got to get company over to customer. We'll manually map that one. And our transformation's done. And we're back. Control F5, restructure that because I like things nice and neat. Now, before we forget, let's go ahead and go back into the database because we've got the structure and we can remove the default values. Because once I move this to production, I don't want those default values in there anymore. And I don't want to have to edit the process. Okay. So now the password, again, got to go here. Believe that that's right. Yep, it popped up. We're good. Okay. So all the credentials are back out. Okay. Very temporary, just enough to get our database connection. Now, where do we put the script that we built? Well, it's real easy. We can just come here and right click and say insert before this script, double click, put in our credential initialization, and there we have it. There's our process. That's it. So let's deploy this out. Let's run a test. So we'll go ahead and, we need to deploy the whole project. That's fine. So that's getting out all the system settings, project variables. It's getting out the script. All of that's out there. We'll go ahead and run this. And while that is running, let's hop over here. If you've been through training, you're familiar with this, right? But we're going to log into our SFTP. See if the process has completed yet. We may have to refresh. We'll see. Nope, there it is right there. So there is the file that we just created. We'll pop that open. Yeah, let's allow that. And there you see my scrubbed sample data. Just dummy data, because this is the dev database, right? So there's that. That works. It's perfect. Everything did exactly what we wanted it to do. It accessed the system settings database, pulled in the database credentials, pulled in the SFTP credentials, plugged those into the process, ran it, and we got our data. But here is the coolest thing about this, in my opinion, is that if we jump over here, I'm going to log into a different SFTP account. See if I can remember this password. So we'll get logged in here, and I want you to see there's basically nothing out here. Wish I would have shown you that on the other one, because I always like showing you guys that it actually is happening. But here we go. So nothing there. We've just got our initial sample data set. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the studio, and we are going to migrate this project from Tech Talk Dev to my Tech Talk environment. Okay. We're going to go and open that target environment when it's done. That's fine. It's going to tell us everything that it's doing here. That's all good. We'll finish that out. It does the migration. And you'll see in the environment dropdown, now we're on Tech Talk, and all I'm going to do is deploy it. No changes. And I can come into my customer extraction operation. I can execute it. So it's going out there. Let's go ahead and go do a refresh, because by the time we get there, it should be there. So we'll just do a little refresh here. And there's our output file. Now, just to show you, let's go back here and refresh in the original one. Nothing new over here. Okay, ends in C656. Over here, E517. Let's grab this one. We're going to see the data itself is different as well. Now, obviously, this is still dummy data, but you see it's different. This isn't the scrubbed Lorem Ipsum type data that was in the other database, because we're connecting to the demo production database now, okay? So let's go back and just do a quick little recap, and then I'm going to jump over and start taking questions. But I hope you guys are getting some value out of this. Like I said, it's a little atypical approach, okay? We understand that. But hopefully it's something that you've learned something from. That's really what this is all about. But this right here is the key, is this script. This is the script we built together, doing our SQL select statement, and this end of it, this where statement, where environment equals get environment name. That's what makes this dynamic based upon whatever environment we migrate the project to. Based upon that Jitterbit environment, that's the set that it's going to pull out of our system settings database. Okay, we do the DB execute here. We're using the project variables for that because of the way we chose to do it in this, and that everything is in one table and just delineated by that third column of the database of the environment. We don't have to make any changes whatsoever. I mean, there are some techniques that you could do and kind of get fancy into, which system settings database or table you're pulling from. You could do some of that, doing the same type of thing, doing the environment quoting. But we did that. We iterated through those, put those into the global variables, and use those a little bit later. So that's a quick little recap of what we did. I will say, obviously, you've got this on screen. It's not a ton of scripting code, but if you guys want this, let us know, and I'd be more than happy to copy and paste this and shoot it over to you, let you have that. I mean, honestly, I could do a full jitter pack of this here and share that with you if that would help you guys, because that's really what this is all about, is helping you guys to really do some interesting things and be able to do some things that might align a little bit better with your corporate policies and structures. So that's what I really had to share with you. So we're going to jump over to questions here in just a moment, but before we do, I do want to talk a little bit about some other resources that we have here at Jitterbit. And hopefully you guys are already familiar with these, but we always want to put it out there in case you're new to the Jitterbit world. If you have questions and want to go out and see some documentation, how does that function actually work? Success.jitterbit.com. That's our product documentation and some great things out there. Of course, if you want to do some learning, we talked about it, Jitterbit University. You can access that at university.jitterbit.com. And then the other one is our community. We encourage people to go out to the community, engage with each other a little bit, answer some questions. If you see feature requests out there, that's the place to put them in, and you can upvote those and let the product team know in that way. But those are always some great things. And then, of course, you can always reach out directly to your customer success manager or your alliance manager if you're on the partner side of things, and get questions answered there. So speaking of questions, let's dive in here. And let's see. So there was a statement here about easy. It would be easy for anyone to just write a script that dumps the password right to the standard output. Yes, that is the case. The thing with this is it's not it's not necessarily a way to restrict your Jitterbit designers, developers, whatever you want to call them, from accessing credentials. That's not what this approach is about. Okay, this approach is about being able to deploy out your projects from one environment to another without having to go in and make changes to those source target definitions, connector definitions, things like that. So let's see here. So yeah, a comment was made, and yeah, these are very valid comments. Like I said, this is not something that's necessarily for everybody. It's just a method that can be used. Ultimately, if you do something external, there does have to be a way somewhere along the way that Jitterbit can get to that password, to that credential, to that server name, whatever it is, and bring that in. And yes, that does potentially expose some risk. Everything we do exposes some level of risk, and it's all about deciding what that risk is and what the best approach is for you. Okay. And I completely understand that. I'm not saying that I would suggest this approach for everybody out there. I'm not saying I would necessarily suggest it for anybody out there, but we do have customers that do prefer this approach. And so we thought it was worth sharing with you. But yes, if you do what's built into Jitterbit, then once that password is masked, you can't really expose that password out again. So if you have somebody else going in and doing some stuff, they can't actually grab the password, even though they can access the system. So yes, pros and cons with everything here. Let's see. So question came up of where did we store the database credentials? In this particular one, and we mentioned it in responding here as well, but it is in a separate database. In our case, we chose to use a Microsoft SQL database. In our case, very simple approach, and so we did not do any special encryption. Yes, that can be done. I didn't do it for the Tech Talk because we only had a limited amount of time to show you everything. So that's what we did there. So let's see here. Oh, let's see. How do we have to declare the database details to Jitterbit? That was done in the project variables. So you do have to have the credentials stored in the project variables. So that way, and those are masked, you can't expose those. And obviously you could do some things there about make that read only for that particular login. And that way you can't overwrite things accidentally and different things like that. So yeah, there's some options there. A comment was mentioned here about some other third-party services for credential management. Yes, you can use some of those. We've got people that are using things like Okta for some things. There's some other ones out there I know as well. And honestly, it's something I don't necessarily get into that much. So I'm not going to be able to speak too much to it, but I know that there are some that use other systems. We just happen to show the example of a database. But yes, there are some others out there. Question was asked about storing in the private agent. Okay, so there is a way in your private agent configuration in your jitterbit.conf file that you can go in and you can declare variables in there, and you can use those within your projects, just like we did in the iterator, and we set those. Basically, everything that runs on that agent would be able to access anything that's set in the jitterbit.conf file. My one thing that I would always suggest with that, make backups. That file is not by default overwritten with Jitterbit private agent upgrades, but I've been doing this stuff long enough to know that backups are always good. So, but yeah, in your jitterbit.conf, there's a section, if you scroll down to the bottom of that, it's been so long since I've looked at it. I don't want to say it's like predefined variables or predefined values, something along those lines. It is, you can find it in Success Central. It is mentioned in there, but it's in that file, the jitterbit.conf file. And I do believe that that is accessible through the web management console now as well. In the agent configuration, you can actually set them there. So you don't have to log into every machine in your agent cluster and do it, although you very well can. So another comment, about this would potentially work well in cases where we may not need a password, but use an SSH key exchange. Absolutely, anything like that. And like I said, this is not something that I would just necessarily say across the board. and use for everybody in every situation. Okay, this is the whole spirit of Tech Talks. Really, is that we just show you some things that are a little atypical, honestly. Things that honestly we may not put in a full training class because it's not something that just is out there. But at the same time, knowing some of these alternative approaches to things, I know for me, sometimes I look at stuff like this and I go, you know what, I wouldn't use it that way, but I could make this tweak and this tweak and this adjustment and use this in maybe a completely different way. Or, hey, I didn't know that that function worked that way. So that's really my hope for you, is that you've learned something about how the platform works today that maybe you didn't know before you came in. Okay, so let's see here. I think there was one other thing that came in here. Is Jitterbit doing maintenance releases, fixes, or enhancements for Design Studio? Yes, there are still maintenance releases. Design Studio is still supported. New features, I'll say. So you asked about fixes and enhancement. Fixes, yes. Enhancements, probably not so much. Most of our enhancements are really being focused on the Cloud Studio platform. So that's where the new features, that's where the new connectors are going in. That's where the process templates are being built for. But yes, bug fixes, absolutely. That is still being done out there because we've got a lot of users that are still using Design Studio. Honestly, we're still using Design Studio internally for some things just because we haven't migrated the project over. It's not necessarily a deficiency or anything. You just haven't had the time to move the project. So yeah, that's still out there. Any other questions? We've still got some time left. And like I told you at the beginning, we make the commitment that if you've got questions, we will do our best to answer those questions. And so I do want to give you just another moment or two here. Let's see. There was something about a 1025. So I'm not sure on that. It was about AMQP on the private agent and studio. I'm not certain on that. I'll tell you the best bet on that would be to reach out directly to your CSM, your customer success manager, or your alliance manager, and touch base with them because they can get you connected to the right person that can get you the right answer for the product roadmap. So apologies, I can't answer that one directly. Like I said, there are just a lot of areas within Jitterbit that I'm not personally up to speed on everything because I do stay focused on the product training. But reach out to your customer success manager, and they can definitely get you an appropriate answer for that one there. Okay. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, so we're going to wrap up today right there. If any others do come in the next few moments, then we will do our best to get your response back over email. But you can also always contact me and my team directly at training@jitterbit.com. Okay. Now, in the event that you've got something that is a little bit more, say, product tech support related, we're probably not the best contact for that. For that, you would reach out to support@jitterbit.com. Okay, so those are kind of your 2 points. But if it is training related or if you've got questions on today's Tech Talk, feel free to reach us at training@jitterbit.com. If you've got something more just general with a product, support@jitterbit.com. Of course, I told you the resources of Success Central, the Jitterbit community, and Jitterbit University. Well, everybody, thank you for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.